They called it Takeover Tuesday, the day $30 million would either make Goldman and Associates a global powerhouse or destroy them completely. In the gleaming towers of Manhattan's financial district, where grown men in $1,000 suits were about to lose the biggest deal of their careers, none of them suspected that their salvation would come from the smallest person in the building. She was 6 years old, 3 feet tall, the daughter of the woman who emptied their trash cans. And in exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, she would walk into their boardroom uninvited, speak 7 languages they didn't know she knew, and save their company from complete humiliation on the international stage. But first, she had to convince herself that a child's voice could matter in a world built for adults who refused to listen. What would you do if you were 6 years old, watching the most powerful people you knew make mistakes that could destroy everything, and you were the only one who could stop it? The first light of dawn hadn't yet touched the glass towers of Wall Street when Maya Williams pressed close to her mother's side as they entered Goldman and Associates International Trading. 5:47 in the morning, 3 hours before any executive would arrive, just them and the sleeping giants of capitalism. At 6 years old, Maya moved through the corridors with the quiet grace of someone who'd learned that being noticed in these halls meant trouble. Her reflection in the marble walls showed what they all saw: 3 feet tall in hand-me-down clothes, dark skin that gleamed despite harsh fluorescent lights, natural black hair in neat braids secured with simple rubber bands. But they never looked close enough to see what mattered. They missed how her small fingers traced over international documents left on desks with the reverence of a scholar examining ancient texts. They didn't notice when her lips moved silently, forming words in Mandarin, Arabic, French, Portuguese, Russian, Japanese languages that flowed through her young mind like a symphony. In her small backpack, pressed against her tiny ribs like a second heart, lay her most precious possession: a journal her grandmother had given her, its pages beginning to fill with notes in 7 languages. Dr. Evelyn Williams had been a linguistics professor before her death 2 years ago, and in her final months, she'd poured every language lesson into her granddaughter's eager mind. "Your gift isn't meant to be hidden, Minha Natinya," she'd whispered, switching between languages as if each one could carry a different piece of her love. Maya had absorbed it all with the miraculous speed that only children possess, her brain forming pathways that adults could barely imagine. Today felt different. The Zhang Industries merger documents had arrived last week, $30 million hanging in the balance. Maya had read every page while her mother worked, hidden in corners where executives never looked. The contract was filled with cultural references and tests that the grown-ups couldn't see. She knew the hired translators would miss them all, just like they always did. Sarah Williams emerged from the supply closet, her cleaning cart loaded for the long day ahead. At 35, she moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to be invisible while supporting a gifted child alone. Her Navy work uniform was clean and pressed, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She'd been cleaning these offices for 3 years, ever since her mother's medical bills had consumed their savings and forced them from their small apartment near the university to a cramped studio in Queens. "Stay close, baby," she whispered to Maya, glancing around to ensure they were alone. The executives didn't like reminders that their invisible workforce had families, especially not children who shouldn't be there. But childcare cost more than Sarah earned, and Maya's extraordinary gifts required supervision that no daycare could provide. "Mama, the Chinese papers have poetry in them," Maya said quietly, her 6-year-old voice carrying the precise pronunciation that amazed everyone who bothered to listen, and special numbers that mean good luck. Sarah nodded, understanding flowing between them without many words needed. She'd raised a daughter who spoke 7 languages fluently by age 5, who corrected translation errors in documents she found, who understood cultural nuances that escaped Ivy League graduates. Now she watched executives pay thousands for terrible translations, while her daughter sat silent in corners, her brilliance invisible to those who couldn't see past her age and skin color. "Keep your voice quiet," Sarah whispered, the same words she'd spoken every day for 3 years. "We can't let them know what you can do." But Maya was growing tired of staying quiet, especially when she could see the grown-ups making mistakes that would hurt people. 3 years earlier, Sarah Williams had been Dr. Sarah Williams, assistant professor of international business at Columbia University. She'd published papers on cross-cultural communication, consulted for Fortune 500 companies, raised her daughter in a world where intelligence was valued and nurtured. Then her mother's glioblastoma diagnosis had changed everything. The experimental treatments, the travel to specialists, the months of unpaid leave that cost Sarah her tenure-track position, all of it had drained their resources faster than she'd thought possible. Maya had been 3 when they'd lost everything, but even then, her gift for languages had been extraordinary. While other toddlers struggled with basic English, Maya switched effortlessly between the Portuguese her grandmother spoke, the French from her mother's academic background, and the Mandarin from educational videos that cost less than babysitters. By 4, she'd added Russian and Arabic from library books. By 5, Japanese from anime shows. Each language came as naturally as breathing, her young brain absorbing grammar and cultural context with speed that defied explanation. The transition from university halls to office buildings had been devastating for Sarah, but necessary. The cleaning job at Goldman & Associates paid enough to keep them housed and fed, barely, and the early morning hours meant Maya could come along during school breaks. Sarah had hoped it would be temporary, just until she could rebuild their lives. But 3 years had passed in a blur of mopped floors and swallowed pride. The morning of the Zhang Industries meeting dawned with unusual tension. By 8 o'clock, the executive floor buzzed with nervous energy. This wasn't just another merger. $30 million would be just the beginning if they could prove themselves worthy partners. CEO Richard Goldman arrived early, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit announcing his importance to anyone who doubted it. Behind him trailed his son Bradley, 29 years old with an MBA, and a sneer that suggested everyone else existed to serve his advancement. Victoria Chen, the firm's star dealmaker, clicked through the marble lobby in heels that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Half Chinese, raised in Connecticut privilege, she spoke enough Mandarin to order at restaurants but insisted she was fluent for business purposes. Maya watched from the corner where her mother had positioned her small chair, her keen eyes taking in every detail. She'd read the documents the executives were discussing, understood the cultural tests embedded in Zhang's proposals that none of the adults had noticed. The opening paragraph contained a reference to a Tang Dynasty poem about trust and rivers. Any true partner would acknowledge it. The payment terms included number combinations that held deep significance in Chinese numerology, but she knew they'd miss everything important. "Make sure that child stays quiet during the meeting," Bradley announced, pointing at Maya without bothering to lower his voice. "The last thing we need is some kid making noise when we're trying to close 30 million. Victoria's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Honestly, bringing children to work. What's next?" She glanced at Maya with the same expression reserved for furniture-noting presence, without acknowledging humanity. Richard Goldman looked over at the small girl sitting perfectly still with a book in her lap, his gray eyes sliding past her as if she were invisible. "You," he said to Sarah, not bothering with her name, though she'd cleaned his office for 3 years. "Keep the child out of sight. This is a business meeting, not a daycare." Maya felt her mother's hand tighten on her shoulder, felt the familiar shame that came with being unwanted in spaces where they didn't belong. She nodded silently, though her small hands clenched around her grandmother's journal. The translation team arrived at noon, Dr. Harrison Fitzgerald leading with his usual arrogance. "MIT Linguistics, Yale MBA, 5 years in Shanghai," he announced, spreading his credentials like a peacock displaying feathers. Maya had heard him work before, watched him turn partnership proposals into insults through his confident incompetence. As the morning progressed, Maya caught glimpses of the documents Fitzgerald was reviewing. Her trained eye spotted critical errors immediately. He'd translated partnership using terms that implied subservience in Chinese culture, completely missed the poetic references, and mangled the numerology into what amounted to financial insults. But she was 6 years old in a world that barely listened to adults who looked like her, much less children. The lunch hour brought the usual dismissals and microaggressions. Executive assistants made faces when Sarah passed, as if poverty were contagious. Security guards shook their heads at the sight of Maya, muttering about workplace policies and proper procedures. Even among the cleaning staff, some questioned why Sarah brought her daughter to work, not understanding that genius required protection in a world determined to waste it. By 1:45, the executive floor crackled with pre-meeting tension. Sarah made her final rounds while Maya sat quietly in the break room, her notebook filled with corrections to documents she wasn't supposed to understand. She'd spent her own time researching Zhang Industries, learning about the philosophical principles that guided their business practices, understanding the deeper meanings behind every proposal. When the meeting began, disaster struck quickly. Through the ventilation system, Maya could hear voices rising in panic, confusion, and cultural misunderstanding. Victoria Chen's voice pitched high with desperation as she attempted Mandarin phrases that made Maya wince. Dr. Fitzgerald's confident translations turned offers of respect into inadvertent insults. The growing silence from the Zhang delegation meant patience had run out. Maya looked at her mother, who was pretending to organize supplies while listening to the catastrophe unfolding above them. "Mama, they're saying it all wrong. Mr. Zhang thinks they don't respect him." "Baby, there's nothing we can do," Sarah whispered, though her heart broke watching her daughter's distress. "We have to stay invisible." But Maya was already moving, her grandmother's voice echoing in 7 languages. "Your gift isn't meant to be hidden." She slipped away from her mother's protective hand and headed for the elevator, her small legs carrying her toward a moment that would change everything. The executive conference room was chaos. Mr. Zhang, 70 years old, with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, sat stone-faced while his team whispered urgently in Mandarin. Maya understood every word they said. The Americans had failed every cultural test, shown no understanding of partnership versus dominance, insulted their intelligence with amateur translations. Maya entered without knocking. 20 heads turned toward the small figure in the doorway, outrage forming on executive lips. But she was already speaking, and not in English. Her Mandarin flowed like music, not the textbook pronunciation the adults used, but perfect Beijing accent with tones that showed deep respect without accepting inferiority. "Honorable Mr. Zhang, please forgive this small interruption. I am very young and nobody important, but my grandmother taught me that sometimes wisdom comes from unexpected places, like the poet Li Bai wrote about flowers that bloom in adversity being the most beautiful of all." The room froze in stunned silence. A 6-year-old speaking flawless Mandarin, referencing classical poetry, understanding cultural context that adults had missed. Zhang's eyes sharpened with decades of business experience, recognizing something extraordinary. He responded with a complex question about rivers and partnerships, testing whether her ability matched her apparent understanding. Maya answered without hesitation, weaving references to his company's founding principles, information she'd learned from Chinese websites during library visits. She spoke of the philosophical framework behind his proposals, acknowledged the tests he'd embedded to measure American cultural intelligence. Then she turned to Zhang's Brazilian deputy, switching to Portuguese with the fluid grace that had amazed her grandmother. The man had been ignored throughout the meeting, his concerns about South American markets dismissed. Maya addressed him directly, acknowledging points he'd tried to raise that the Americans had overlooked. Russian came next for the logistics director, then French for the European analyst, Japanese for the quality supervisor, Arabic for the Middle Eastern advisor. Each language shift brought cultural adjustments that showed genuine understanding rather than mere vocabulary. Maya wasn't just translating words, she was translating worlds, building bridges between cultures with the skill that had been developing since her first words. "Who are you, little one?" Zhang asked in Mandarin, his tone carrying amazement and respect. Maya straightened her small shoulders, her grandmother's journal visible in her arms. "I am Maya Williams. My mama cleans your offices, and my grandmama taught me that language is the bridge between hearts. I am someone who reads your papers when the grown-ups aren't looking and sees their mistakes. I am proof that wisdom can be very small and still very important." She switched to English, addressing the stunned executives. "You're losing this deal because you hired people who know words but not hearts, mister. Zhang put tests in his papers to see if you understand respect and partnership, but nobody looked close enough to see them." The silence stretched endlessly. Richard Goldman's face cycled through shock, calculation, and desperate recognition of necessity. Zhang spoke quietly to his team in rapid Mandarin, explaining that this American company had hidden treasures they didn't value, that perhaps partnership was possible with those who could see worth in unexpected places. He stood and offered Maya a slight bow, a gesture of respect that made the American executives gasp. In Chinese business culture, such acknowledgement from a senior figure was extraordinary, especially to a child. "Please sit with us, young teacher," Zhang said in English, gesturing to a chair someone quickly adjusted for her height. "Help us understand each other." The next 90 minutes transformed disaster into triumph. Maya guided both sides through cultural complexities with wisdom that defied her age. She explained the poetry in Zhang's proposals, helped the Americans understand that acknowledging classical references showed respect for Chinese culture. She translated their enthusiasm into appropriate partnership language, maintaining dignity for both sides. The numbers began shifting as understanding deepened. What had started as a $30 million deal expanded as Zhang recognized the potential of partners who valued cultural intelligence. By meeting's end, they were discussing $50 million in initial investment, with plans for sustained partnership that could reshape both companies. As papers were signed, Zhang approached Maya directly. "My offer stands, little one," he said quietly in Mandarin. Someone who understands 7 languages and the hearts that speak them would always have a place with Zhang Industries. Other team members pressed business cards into her small hands, promises of future opportunities when she was older. Richard Goldman intercepted Maya and Sarah at the elevator, his composure cracking completely. "Name your price," he said to Sarah. "Private tutor, full education, whatever your daughter needs. She just saved us millions." Maya looked up at him with the directness that only children possess. "We don't need your money," she said quietly. "We needed you to see that smart comes in all sizes and colors. That every day, amazing people work in your building in uniforms, and you choose not to notice." Sarah took her daughter's hand, pride and protection warring in her expression. They entered the elevator together, leaving Goldman standing speechless in his marble hallway. In the lobby, Maya noticed Carmen, a young woman who cleaned the executive bathrooms and carried textbooks in her supply cart. Maya pressed her grandmother's journal into Carmen's hands, the weight of wisdom transferring between generations. "Fill it with your dreams," Maya said in Spanish. "In any language you choose. Don't let them tell you you're too anything to be amazing." By Monday, offers poured in from companies eager to invest in Maya's extraordinary education, international schools, language institutes, universities offering full scholarships for when she was older. Sarah chose carefully, finally accepting a partnership with a progressive school that would nurture Maya's gifts while keeping them grounded in community service. Maya Williams became the youngest consultant in Goldman's history, helping with international deals during school breaks. But more importantly, she became proof that brilliance couldn't be contained by age, race, or circumstance. The Williams Language Academy started in their small apartment, with Maya teaching other children whose gifts had been overlooked. Years later, business schools would study the Zhang merger, missing the real lesson that a 6-year-old had taught them. They'd focus on cultural intelligence and communication strategies while overlooking the truth. Maya embodied that genius exists everywhere, speaks in every language, and arrives at every age. On quiet evenings, Maya would sit by her window doing homework in multiple languages, watching the night shift arrive at the buildings across the street. She knew their children would find their way to her academy eventually, carrying notebooks filled with potential, speaking languages that could reshape worlds if given the chance. She'd teach them what her grandmother had taught her, what life was proving true, that your voice matters regardless of your size, that silence in the face of dismissal is not safety but slow suffocation, that sometimes the most powerful statement is simply refusing to remain invisible. Some battles are won not with power or age, but with courage and wisdom. If you were her, watching adults make mistakes you could fix, would you have stayed quiet because you were told children should be seen and not heard? Or would you have found your moment to remind them that brilliance comes in every size, speaks in every voice, and sometimes arrives in the smallest packages? The choice is always before us to accept the world's limited vision or to insist, with all the languages at our disposal, that we are more than what they assume we can be.